misinformation, disinformation, malinformation. Now, the right-wing movement to suppress these things has begun. In this episode, we'll explain how so-called conservatives and MAGA types are going to join the left in suppression and censorship. But you have access to a spirit, a strength that enlarges and empowers you. Even better, you don't need to wait for the next big movement. You can heal the world. It's time for governance by grace. Welcome to Gracearchy with Jim Babka. It's been weeks since Douglas Murray and Dave Smith appeared on the Joe Rogan Experience, and today we're going to explore the ongoing conversation, actually, that has begun because of that particular interview. Jim, give us some background here.
Well, first, I just had to throw a cough drop in my mouth. I'm doing much better, but
oh yes,
not quite there.
Good for you. Cheers, buddy. Here's to you.
Real progress the last 3 days. I watched the Joe Rogan show. I'll allude to this in a moment. But Doug Murray came on ostensibly to promote a book, and they were supposed to have a debate about Russia, Ukraine, and Israel, Palestine. Dave Smith has been on Joe Rogan's show repeatedly, has explained many things about this issue. I am not here to litigate that issue. And guess what? Doug Murray wasn't there to litigate that issue either. Spent 45 minutes at the beginning of the podcast, concern trolling, lecturing. I'll get to that in a moment. I want to say something up front about Joe Rogan. That we titled this podcast his name. We hope we get clicks for it. I'm going to be really honest with it about that. It was on the Joe Rogan show that happened. But I think the Joe Rogan show is kind of an amazing thing in our current media environment. I think it's one of the most wonderful things that's happened. I'm not saying that I agree with Joe Rogan. I don't think that's, he's a human being. I'm a human being. We differ on various things. Other people differ. I'm saying that his openness, which was even evident during this podcast, to open discussion of ideas and just letting things kind of flow where they go, means that a lot of interesting things surface. And every time that the quality control department shows up from any type of movement, they tend to ruin things. There's a natural beauty to just sitting there and having a conversation. Now, I can count on one hand the number of times I've listened to an entire episode of his show. That said, I found each of them remarkable in some way. My favorite was when Dr. McCullough, during the worldwide sickness, was on the show, and he had a theory about why alternative therapies and treatments had been suppressed. And he kept saying, I'm not a politician, or I'm not in these worlds. He did that during the first hour. He did it during the second hour. But Joe kept kind of subtly coming back to wanting to know why this happened. And all of a sudden, he let loose with a conspiracy theory in hour 3. And he started sounding like a guy that had tinfoil hat on his head. And if the interview had been like we do in most media settings, that third hour would have never occurred. And that natural conversation would not have developed and flowed. Both the tiredness of McCullough and the comfort he was feeling in the studio with Joe had led to a moment of authenticity that we all got to see. And that has happened several times. I tend to watch more clips by far of Joe Rogan than I do the entire show, but that's happened consistently. And I'm kind of resentful of anybody that wants to break that up. You may not like the things that he said, and just because you don't like them, well, too bad. I think the reason this show has risen to the level it has is this open authenticity that exists in the setting. And Joe has been very respectful to all of his guests, including the ones who have been rude or rude to him subsequently. Next, I don't have any need to defend Dave Smith. He's one of the few libertarian celebrities, by the way, that I don't personally know. We have no relationship. I know we have 1 degree of separation with probably, 500 or 800 people, but I have not actually spent any time with Dave personally. He's capable of defending himself, and he's got a much larger audience with which to do it. And I'm not interested in the specifics of the debate that occurred. We're going to barely touch on a couple of things because of the relevance to my topic today. But I'm not interested in relitigating that. You can get that elsewhere. It is all over YouTube right now. This will be different today. But when Doug Murray shows up, and I started to watch this when it first broke, and I stuck with it for an hour, which is far longer than I do. I usually don't even open the full Joe Rogan podcast, but this is far longer than I would normally go. I was kind of interested to see what this debate was going to yield. I thought, oh, good. Two guys who have real opinions on this issue, who are being publicly quoted on this issue. I have a chance to learn something. If you go to my Facebook page and you look to see how I describe myself, I say there are only 3 reasons to debate. I want you to learn something. I want the audience who's watching all of us to learn something.
Sure.
Or I get to learn something.
Yeah.
And if those 3 factors don't exist, the debate shouldn't occur, in my personal opinion. It's just an argument. It's just showing off. It's just ego. And that's how most people debate. And I don't find that very gracious. Okay? But I am more than willing to debate. And in fact, I love getting 2 people together who disagree about something and then sitting back. Maybe I'll even throw some logs on the fire to try to glean information that I might get from it. Because I can be transformed and changed. I can be smarter. Maybe this is a shortcut to knowledge. Doug Murray wasted 45 minutes of my life, and I'm not ready yet to forgive him. Because he spent his time concern trolling and appealing to an audience of 1. That person was Sam Harris. So I don't know. There may have been a couple other people in the Sam Harris, Doug Murray circle. People who, want to be recognized in the cosmopolitan salons, right? You're in the right crowd. You have the right connections. And when we did the Michael Shermer episode, which we'll put down in the show notes, he too took a jab at Joe Rogan that was completely unnecessary, and we pointed this out. And it's on the same topic. So this may have been building. So maybe there's a few dozen of these fellows who have decided that they really don't like who Joe has on his show. So, Bill, I want you to imagine I'm coming to your house for dinner. You've invited me. And when I arrive, I refuse to start the meal because I want you to have a struggle session over how infrequently you invite me. Why, Bill, it's so terrible. You hardly ever invite me. I can't believe I've had to wait for a year to be back here to sit at your table. I thought we were friends. In fact, I thought you were a guy who valued good company, and I am the epitome of good company. I don't understand why and I go on like this for a while. How many minutes do you endure that before you tell me to get out of the house?
No, not very long. I'd say, look, if I wanted my mother for dinner, I would have invited her.
Joe sat there for 45 minutes, essentially having the same thing done to him.
Yeah.
And in a nondescript, elitist, dilettante way. It was horrible podcasting. It's one of the worst things I've ever listened to. Like, I can't believe I kept sticking with the thing. Well, this is going to end in a minute. This is going to end in a minute. This is going to. And then I started to wonder why Joe wasn't throwing him out. That's what kept me there a little bit longer.
Right. Did Joe make any effort to stop it?
No, because Joe's a good guy who allows open conversation to occur.
Okay.
And since Doug was, even though Doug was completely off topic and chastising him, scolding him, and indirectly, he would later directly insult Dave Smith, but indirectly trying to. Both Dave and Joe stayed very open and tried to treat what he was doing with respect and courtesy, even though what he was doing was virtually akin to what I just described. But wait, there's another way to look at this. You've made a meal for me, and the food grows cold because I'm spending time discussing the poor quality of the meals you served to previous dinner guests. I have heard through the grapevine that you are feeding this to these people and that to these people, and these are unhealthy foods. I cannot believe that you have guests at your house to which you serve unhealthy foods. Now, you're not serving a terrible meal here. I mean, I really don't like the dessert you've made, but the rest of the meal is probably pretty good, right? In other words, I'm here, so this isn't a bad deal, but you haven't had me here often enough, and you haven't had people like me here often enough.
Yeah, I see where you're going.
45 minutes of this. And Doug Murray owes me that back. You say, Jim, you could have turned it off any moment you wanted, but I didn't know it was going to end. I told you why I was listening. And then when we got into the first 15 minutes of the actual debate, it turned out he wasn't even really willing to debate. And so I turned it off. And here's my message to Mr. Murray. Get your own show. Oh, wait, I think he has one. I don't know if he does or doesn't. I don't know if I would be willing to listen to the haughty British accented version of dilettanteville that he is out there providing. Okay. He embraces and still defends the Iraq war, for God's sake.
Yeah.
Okay. This is not somebody that I'm particularly interested in tuning into. I didn't know much about him. I had a somewhat favorable impression before I turned on the podcast. His behavior in that podcast, the subsequent analysis of other people who shared other clips from that podcast, positive and negative. Some people think they've managed to defend him, and even they did a bad job. He kicked his own butt in the debate. Dave Smith didn't win the debate. Dave Smith said this himself. Doug Murray beat himself up. We'll cover, I'll get into some one fine point about that before we're through. But if this is Joe Rogan's show, this is Joe Rogan's house, and you were a very, very bad dinner guest. This story has turned into a flashpoint. Forget the debate. Forget the appearance on Joe Rogan. What Doug Murray chose to say is now starting to be dissected. And there are people beginning to defend it.
That starts the conversation.
Yeah, because you notice, like most media things, like we sit, you and I have this happen all the time. Maybe we should go in the studio and do a show on X, but by the time we're able to do it, we realize the story will be completely off the headlines and no one will care. And so there are times when we've chosen to do something else instead because we recognize this thing's too instant, and almost everything in the news has that flavor. It has a 3 to 5 day shelf life. It's like lettuce.
Yeah.
Right? It lasts about as long. And, but this one seems to be a culture war flashpoint.
Well, there are people out there who want Doug Murray to be right.
Indeed. Oh my gosh, that is a linchpin to a lot of what we're going to discuss. So, and I just to make one more point about the culture war. I prefer not to discuss culture war issues. I believe most culture war issues are distractions, or they're designed to divide people. But
So
this one matters.
What makes this one different?
Good question.
Because it does both those things.
Yes. One way that I would test this and say that you could tell which times a culture war issue matters is who are the sides.
Yeah.
And in this particular case, the sides are the elites versus the rest of us. The establishment versus the rest of us. So normally what they're doing, the distraction or division that they're trying to create, is to try to split the population and get them to go at war with each other and not focus on bigger issues. But in this particular case, this is the higher level going after the lower level to try to get the lower level to consent to their own silencing. And that's the theme of today's show. To consent to their own silencing. And that's why this one is different. This is not your normal partisan spin game. In fact, there's a deep irony in that the left has been very censorious. The left has also been very woke, but there's a new crowd adopting both of those things.
Yeah. So we're talking about the new establishment here.
Yes.
The new swamp.
Yes. So you open with misinformation, disinformation, malinformation. And it's so recent that most of the right-wing crowd isn't going to go for any of those terms. It's going to have to be packaged differently, and they're going to have their messengers come and bring it to them so that they too will sign up for the program. So the left is very, very concerned about misinformation, disinformation. They talk about it all the time. The established secular left.
Yeah.
The right can't quite do this because they were the victims of it for a while. And so if they're going to now advance this same message now that they're in power, they have to package it differently. And I believe this is what's beginning to happen. The right-wing celebritarians have gone woke.
So this is not just a knee-jerk. This is a strategy.
It is literally a strategy. And there's evidence beyond what I'm going to have time and ability to get into here today. Okay? I'm just going to summarize kind of what's happening. So first, what's happening right now, and this is very, very important. We have to say this part out loud. You cannot criticize the state named after Isaac's son.
Well, what's new about that?
We actually have laws and we have deportations that are happening at this hour because people have been critical. Like, you can criticize the state of Arizona or New York. You can criticize the state of Alabama
Or
Alaska,
Denmark or Greenland or
Hawaii.
Canada.
You can just, any other nation in the world, but you cannot criticize. So there's been a climb. By the way, there's also, this isn't just a state that begins with the letter I. It also is a philosophy that begins with the letter Z.
Yes.
And I can't say either word because we've entered the same territory we were in during the worldwide sickness, where you could get banned or struck or removed from a platform for talking like this. And worse, just raising these issues automatically makes you somehow or other anti these people. You're a bigot. You hate these people. You're an anti them. And, with it's a sickness that I oppose deeply. And yet we can't even, just me bringing this up probably automatically groups me with the worst of them. Like, that's how extreme this has become. During the Obama years, there were a lot of people who were, when he was first elected, who were thrilled. They thought this was a big leap forward for our nation, that we had elected a black man to be president. And it didn't turn out that way, because race ended up becoming a very divisive issue throughout his term. And every time you disagreed with him, it was because you were a racist. So now this nation, named after the son of Isaac, with a philosophy that begins with Z, has now made it a similar thing. Any degree of criticism of them is to be anti them. Any disagreement with any level of policy whatsoever that's coming out of there, and it is becoming part of law now. So it's the situation is actually literally worse than the ones that conservatives faced before, where they were being constantly accused of being bigots and racists. Now the situation is even worse, because you can actually be criminally charged or you can be deported for it.
Yeah.
This is a serious matter. And it's going to backfire, by the way. It's going to hurt the cause that it's supposedly defending. There will be a negative reaction over time to this. This is not going to last.
It's also nothing new. As you pointed out, it goes way back before Obama.
Yes,
people have
but I'm talking about this specific overuse of a term right now. I want to make sure I'm clear.
Yes.
Right. Every time you disagreed with Barack Obama, you were a racist. So every time now that you disagree with this nation and the party that runs it,
right,
and the things that they're doing, anytime you have a criticism of that, you are anti them, which doesn't make any sense, because there's a minority party in their country that accounts for nearly 40% of the population that thinks that what's going on is wrong. It's a moronic statement, but it's exactly how it's handled. And even Murray does this to Dave Smith. So let me give you two things that happened in the debate that I think are really worth noting. These are the only things I want to talk about from the debate itself that are really worth noting. First, there was a moment in the actual debate after the 45-minute time waster bad dinner guest portion was over, where the Iraq War was discussed. In the Iraq War, this is historical fact. Paul Wolfowitz, who was the Deputy Secretary of Defense, and Richard Perle, who Mr. Perle, I don't remember what his title was, but these were high-ranking figures of the neoconservative movement. They had signed the letter for the Project for a New American Century in the late 90s. These were guys that believed that we needed to figure out some excuse to attack Iraq. And after 9/11 happened, they and Donald Rumsfeld and others believed we had that opportunity. So Dave says this out loud. He's talking about the credibility of the establishment on foreign policy. They have been horrendously anti-credible. They have been proven wrong again and again and again. They have created more and more disasters. They've created new problems. Again and again and again.
9/11, right?
I would argue going all the way back to the end of World War II. Ever since the creation of the modern Pentagon, Joint Chiefs of Staff, CIA, all the different stuff that they've put together to be our national security infrastructure, in this modern era. They have been constantly causing new problems. So Wolfowitz and Perle are architects of a policy that takes us to war with Iraq. They are in the room. This is incontrovertible historical fact. But Murray pretends like this is the strangest thing he's heard. And he says, I don't know what you think you're doing here, but I'm not going to try to do his British accent. He talked painfully slow. But you're implying something by using the names Wolfowitz and Perle. You're implying a certain type of conspiracy. And you know that it's like lifting up the sewer. You know what that's going to attract. And they weren't really that important. I mean, I can't even believe you're bringing this up. One's a deputy secretary of defense, and the other's got some other position. And you know that they're not really important in this matter. So it must be strictly that you really are trying to appeal to some of our worst elements. You're trying to get the bigots to come out and take your side, basically. Now, Bill, fortunately, there's receipts on this. This is a public figure. And in 2016, he did an interview where he talked about being in the Kurdish portion of Iraq. And in the Kurdish portion of Iraq, he was taken to a building. And in that building, he went up some steps, and there's portraits on the wall of Donald Rumsfeld, who he did say was credible a moment ago, and Paul Wolfowitz and Mr. Perle. And he said, why do you have these pictures up? I'm in a Kurdish area in Iraq. Why are these American pictures up? Oh, these are men of great people. They have helped liberate us. They devised the plan. And he went on to say they recognize the wonderful thing that these men have done for them. Most Americans don't know what wonderful things these men have done. So literally in 2016, he was already aware. I can do, this is going to be difficult for some people, but I do believe 2016 comes before April of 2025. It does, right?
Affirmative.
So he was aware of this and had stated this as historical fact, the very thing that he chides Dave with, and doesn't stop there. He starts to smear all over him. You're anti. You hate these people. You're trying to raise bigotry. That's one of his arguments during the actual debate. That's the quality of it.
That's not an argument.
No. The other one is the famous been there. Have you been there? Have you been there? Right? Which is a stupid argument. It's a complete non-starter. And in this particular case, I'm going to go further than I've heard anybody so far suggest and say the fact that Mr. Murray has been there makes him less aware, less accurate, less intelligent. And here's what I mean by that. So the debate that was going on at that moment had to do with whether or not goods are able to cross checkpoints right now.
Yeah.
In the beginning of March, it had been announced in the media over in that country, in the press over in this nation, it had been announced that by the government that they were stopping the flow of food through those checkpoints. This was a purposeful thing. They wanted a better deal in the negotiations that they were engaged in with Hamas. And so they did not, they started to close that off. And rather than acknowledge that this was a fact, I mean, it's been reported in the press. That wasn't mentioned in the debate, by the way. Rather than acknowledge this fact, he said, have you been to the checkpoints? Have you visited? I've been there. I would make an attempt to go to a place that I would deem to speak on. Now, there's two things to say about this, aside from the fact that it's just a dumb argument. First, there are a number of things that Mr. Murray has commented on his career that he has no personal knowledge or experience of. I mean, it is long. There's been people that have gone and grabbed the receipts on this. But the bigger point is, how did he get to those checkpoints? Now, if you are Dave Smith and you are opposed or disagreeing with the majority party over in this other state, do you think they give tours to you as well and take you to the checkpoints?
Oh, sure.
Do you think that while you're there, they show you what's actually happening?
Yeah.
Or do you think they would not let you come in. Or if they invited you in, they might show you something that was different from the truth when you're not there.
Yep.
So Mr. Murray more than likely actually knows less because of his visit, because of the tour that they subsequently gave him, all of which is documented in other YouTube shows. He may actually know less. So here's what really matters in this debate. And I don't want to disrespect Mr. Murray. I want to actually address what I think was his primary point. There is one thing I think was a primary point he really, really cared about and wanted to make. It didn't have anything to do with these two wars. It had to do with who is the guest on Joe Rogan's show. His central claim is that you have to be an expert.
And what makes him an expert?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. I mean, his degree is in English Lit, right? But he might argue, well, I've written a book. And I actually do think that's pretty credible. I think that's probably even better than a degree in many cases. But these are old-fashioned ways of credentialism. What he's actually arguing for is credentialism. And to go one step further, he's not just arguing for credentialism. He's actually arguing that only the people on his team should be heard from. See, we've all gotten together and we've all deemed each other to be experts. And those are the people that should be here. And Joe, you're bringing the wrong guest to dinner. Now, it has been historically true. And it is part of the way that Mr. Murray has attained his fame and celebrity. That who appears on shows for the most part are not experts. Joe's had all kinds of experts on his show. But most people, most of the time, are in a role that is better known as commentator. I'm going to say this again because I have been waiting for somebody to make this point. Most of the people who appear on shows to discuss what's going on are not actually experts. They're commentators. You will recall we had Jerry Boyer on the show. Jerry Boyer was on the show and he came in and he talked about his role in CNBC. Do you remember this, Bill? Jerry Boyer came on our show and discussed his role at CNBC. And he actually explained how much time it took out of a day and how you actually, by virtue of being a commentator, you were actually falling behind because you were busy getting ready to go to the interview, going to the interview, doing the interview, and coming back from the interview. And all that time you could have been doing research.
Right.
You could have actually been engaged in your trade. You would have been gaining experience that was valuable. So you were getting dumber as a result of commentating. Like he actually explained. And so what commentating has become for the most part is like conflict. People fight each other. And you see it in sports, media. You see it because that's what most of the sports media is. Stephen A. Smith has built an entire career on this.
Oh, yeah.
This is what you see in the financial media, as Jerry Boyer explained in the episode, which we will put down in the show notes. And so too, obviously, politics is a conflict machine, so it's full of this. So you watch CNN, they have these huge panels. Okay, the people talking, they're not experts. They don't actually have a lot of direct personal knowledge. In fact, it's worse than that. They have these sheets that get sent out by their team that give them talking points, and their goal is to professionally spin. So this is the media we came from. And now we go to Podcastville, where we have these amateurs who love the knowledge of the thing that they're doing, and they're providing far superior, in terms of content, maybe not production value, but in content, far superior material, which is why YouTube is flourishing. And we got a group of people on the left that already said, oh man, the internet got out of control. We can't let this is going to get out of control now too.
People might actually get the real information, the truth.
Now the right is beginning to do the same kind of concern trolling. Yep. Okay. And they're doing this because they have arrived. They're acting as if they're going to be doing. They are now the new establishment. They have achieved political victory. They believe they are on the top of the cultural zeitgeist. And like so many people, this is true even in the immigration debate. I have crossed the threshold, closed the door behind me. I'm the last one in. Everyone else needs to stay out. And I'm going to name names. This started with Ben Shapiro and the Daily Wire. We're going to get back to the Daily Wire in a moment. This has been going on with Barry Weiss and the Free Press. This has been going on. By the way, I neglected to mention, even though he's not at the Daily Wire, Dave Rubin is a part of that crowd. He has his own power base. It is the newly inducted into the conservative movement, Bill Maher.
Bill Maher, can you believe?
They've crossed the threshold and they want to close the door. Bill Maher sits there and says with a straight face to Doug Murray, "I'm a free speech absolutist, but." Folks, when someone says I'm something but, the only thing that matters is what comes after the but. It often obviates, kills the previous claim. Barack Obama said, "I'm pro-Second Amendment, but," and then he started to describe ways he wished we could take away guns. Like this conjunction really matters. It tells us the real truth. So one of the people who has now come out to speak out against this, and I sat and listened to his entire commentary from start to finish. It deserves probably a point-by-point response show of itself, was Konstantin Kizin. And I'm only bringing him up because he has now branded all of the people, including Joe Rogan, that they would like to get under their thumb. He has called all of us freewheeling people who aren't paying homage to their gods, Podcastistan.
So it's Podcastistan versus the new swamp.
Well, yeah, it is a new swamp, no doubt. So there is the beginning now of a new debate that is emerging that I think is much more significant than the debate that happened in the flash of a moment and has caught everybody's attention because they didn't actually debate the issues that they were supposed to be there to debate. Douglas Murray refused. The bigger issue is what's starting to happen now and how these figures are beginning to come out and say, hey, we got people, they've kind of been allies to us, but we got to call them out because they're a little conspiratorial. They're not experts. I mean, they come on and they reach out to the more unseemly bits and they make claims that they shouldn't be making. We can actually do, we could say that, we can make arguments from authority and other arguments. We could straw man their arguments and we can do guilt by association with yet other people that we maybe even agree we dislike, but we're still going to combine them with them anyway, which is a lot of what Doug Murray did as well. He kept trying to make the suggestion that somehow or other Dave Smith's presence was akin to saying that, and I'm skipping a lot of steps in between. Okay, I know it. We're in the interest of time. But it somehow was letting Hitler off the hook for World War II and blaming Churchill instead. And he keeps repeating this claim, despite the fact that he's never, by the way, been there in terms of listening to the people that he's criticizing. He has no familiarity with them. He openly admits it, and yet he keeps reasserting the claim. He hasn't actually been there when it comes to explaining what these people's position is. And that was a lot of the 45 minutes wasted. They spent a lot of time talking about Daryl Cooper of Martyr Made and his views on history, not Dave Smith's views on these foreign policy questions. And it's not, this past week, we just got indication that this is actually going to turn into a campaign. So Jordan Peterson, subtly, he's on Joe Rogan's podcast. He only got a few minutes. It kind of collapsed because Joe ended up terminating it. This time, Joe didn't let it go on. But he tried to start to say, well, these people have these views and they are psychopaths. They're psychopaths. And so I'm struggling with the same thing myself. How are you going to address this issue? Like I'm thinking about my show and whether or not certain people should have audience and what happens if they get audience. And so you guys went really deep into this. And so I could tell there's a little bit of struggle. What's your process? Do you have a system? What are you doing to make sure you keep the bad people off your show? This isn't an accident, Bill. He's part of the Daily Wire crowd.
Yeah.
Now, can I point out an irony? These foreigners, Doug Murray's from England, Peterson's from Canada, are coming down and telling us how we should apply our First Amendment now.
A British accent is fashionable, man. That gives you gravitas.
I want to point out, Joe Rogan was attacked by CNN and the establishment media constantly in the late teens and early 20s. And it got more and more and more intense during the worldwide sickness. Do you remember that?
Yes.
So if we could only have experts talking, we should have sided with CNN.
Oh, of course.
Peter Hotez, who was a doctor and a friend of Dr. Fauci, the fire starter, the fireman who put out the fire he started. And didn't actually do that either. But he's friends. He's an ally. And he's regularly quoted by the media. And he had appeared a few times on Joe Rogan's show. He attacked Joe for the guests that he was inviting on. Joe said, I'll have you on to debate one of them. I will not come on to debate one of them. I'm just going to tell you, Joe, you shouldn't be doing this kind of show. I'm going to tell you how your show should be run. And they got almost everything wrong. The establishment got almost everything wrong during that pandemic. When they weren't lying overtly, they were actually screwing up. And then, you remember how bad Joe got it for taking ivermectin?
Oh my gosh.
Which is a Nobel Prize winning drug. And he's not harming anybody by doing this. He's not picking anybody's pocket or breaking anybody's leg. He didn't recommend anybody did. He just said, my doctor gave it. And they started accusing him of consuming horse paste.
Yeah.
Horse paste. The establishment, the government put out tweets saying, don't take horse drugs.
Yep. The old
which was
swamp.
An overt lie.
Yeah. Oh, wait a minute. That was the precursor to the new swamp.
Yes.
That was like new swamp 0.1.
So if we'd have followed the advice of these people and gatekeeped Joe Rogan back then, he wouldn't have been helping us see the truth at the earliest possible stages.
Yes.
Because it was happening to him and he was feeling and experiencing it too. So Joe, I doubt you're going to see what I'm about to say right now, but don't change who you are. Continue to be you. And I'm confident, by the way, that he doesn't need to hear me say that. He already has that built into him. So the left was already censorious. Now we have the right-wing celebritarians consolidating their power now.
Celebritarians.
Okay?
Yes.
I'm calling them this because they built a career appealing to a certain crowd with building commonalities on things they liked. I'm as Christian as you are. And in fact, one guy converts, a couple of them convert. They get baptized very publicly. Another one who doesn't really believe says, I'm going to start doing shows where we're going to break down the book of Exodus and whatnot. I mean, they're all trying to appeal to this crowd in a variety of different ways to help build the support they needed to create a movement that would defeat the left. And now that they have that movement, they're going to play the role of Pied Piper. They're going to start playing the flute and leading all the children to their destruction. And Rene Girard explains a portion of how this works. So when the rivals begin to heat up and they become more and more like each other, there are other people that could be drawn into the intensity of that competition. And you have a concept called contagion. They start to pick a side. And they become like the people that are kind of the representatives of the class.
Yeah, yeah.
And they build a mob. Now, we had an episode we just did a couple ago. We're going to put it down in the show notes where we talked about the scapegoat and we went into this in some detail. And not enough people tuned into it. It was our Easter Good Friday episode. So we're going to put that down in the show notes too. And I would encourage people to go tune into that to get a little more flavor of what I'm saying here. But mobs don't build things. Mobs destroy them. And partisanship is mobs. The Democrats have a mob. The Republicans have a mob. And inside each of these parties, they have gangs and mobs. And they are like a cancer. They eat through things like termites. They burn stuff down. They destroy. They do not build. And that's what this is about at the end of the day. We want to make sure we destroy certain voices, certain dissent, because we have something that we want to keep going. I am a real free speech absolutist, unlike Bill Maher. And it is the place, Bill, where grace has its opportunity to operate and shine. So I want to close with 3 quick grace points. First, it is very much the American way for us to have free and open expression. And we have an amendment to protect this, the First Amendment. That's missing in Canada. That's missing in England. That's missing from a lot of the tradition and heritage of a lot of other countries. But it's here, and it's helped us out more than once. It's not been perfect, but it has helped us out more than once. James Madison at Federalist number 10 said that these mobs, they were called faction back then. You call them political parties. They're actually mobs. He said that the solution to faction was more faction. In other words, the solution to people raising certain arguments is more counter arguments. That's how you deal with things. That's the rational, best way to deal with things, because there's always different people with different interests, and the truth is not necessarily being expressed by the people who are the experts. 2, the establishment lies. A lot. I mean, a lot.
It has.
So we have an episode we did. We'll put this down in the show notes too, about the Truth About War website that we built before the Iraq War started. They lied to you about the Iraq War. They lied to you about the pandemic. They lied to you about Russian influence over Donald Trump. They lie. Just because some of the people that you were listening to and enjoying a year, 2 years, 5 years ago are now wanting to shut people down doesn't mean they're beginning to tell the truth. The corruption of power can be so profound, so deep. Lord Acton had a phrase for it. Power tends to corrupt, but absolute power corrupts absolutely. And what they're requesting of you right now is absolute power. We should be able to decide who speaks and who doesn't. And we should put weight on Joe Rogan. We should find ways to stamp down Joe Rogan so he gets in line, he gets with the program, and everybody else better too. And 3, this is the most radical idea of all of them. Oh, I'm glad you stayed this long. I think we need dissenters, even for bad ideas. There's this concept called teach the controversy. And I believe, contrary to what the expert progressive class tends to think of things, that hearing from these people is actually good. And that includes people who believe, for example, the earth is flat, or the moon landing didn't happen, or whatever other crazy thing is out there. Because they need to be answered. And when in the process of answering, the answers get sharper and stronger. The arguments improve, and more people learn about those facts and those truths. And in fact, they begin to care about those because there is a conflict. Every movie you watch, you go to the theater, you sit in a movie, every one of them has a conflict going on.
Sure.
So even the way music is written often has kind of a conflict mode inside of it, right?
Absolutely. Telling a story. You can't do it.
That's how stories work. So this is who we are as humans. We pay more attention when there's a conflict going on. We just do. And so strong arguments are opportunities that can lead to real truth. And so I don't want all of my opponents to vanish. That would be bad for me. It would be bad for my side. When people forget those lessons because they're no longer controversial, they start repeating the same errors that their forebears did. There was somebody who put out a tweet when right after so-called Liberation Day, when the tariffs got hiked, and gave the dates of the previous times that they did the tariffs were dramatically increased, and said, basically we have to do this about every 100 years because we have to wait for everybody to be dead. If anybody's alive, remembers what's going on, they go, wait a minute, we already did this before, right? We have to have a whole new group of people to fool. And unfortunately, we're all born so young that we don't know what came before us. But when it's a conflict and controversy and people are beginning to debate it, well, then we can begin to gather knowledge of the history of it and the facts of it and so forth. The way I'd actually hoped that Doug and Dave were going to debate on Joe's show. But he didn't do that. He didn't actually have any arguments. He played with logical fallacies instead, especially the appeal to authority, and kicked his own butt in the debate. But the most ironic part of this is he probably managed to set back the cause that he was allegedly there to defend in the first place. All this woke overreach by the controlling party of this other nation to control our dialogue here, does that evidence that their arguments are weak? And whether that's true or not, That's the effect it's going to have. And the fact that Doug had to focus, even in front of his opponent, on the silencing of his opponents as opposed to actually taking their arguments, gives a signal to everyone that there's blood in the water, in the sense that their arguments are weak. And it's, I think, Bill, he managed to set his team back. And all of this could be avoided by stepping up to the plate and actually using the free speech toolkit, and then accepting graciously that you have opponents and allowing these other commentators to offer their arguments, because it's the arguments, not the person, to which we should be responding. That is how you practice grace.